The monks at a remote monastery in Europe followed a rigid tradition annually of silence. Their vow could only be broken once a year on Christmas by one monk. One Christmas, Brother Thomas had his turn to speak and said, "I love the delightful mashed potatoes we have every year with the Christmas roast." Then he sat down. Silence ensued for 365 days. The next Christmas, Brother Michael got his turn and said, "I think the mashed potatoes are lumpy, and I truly despise them." Once again, silence ensued for 365 days. The following Christmas, Brother Paul rose and said, "I am fed up with this constant bickering." You know, peace is hard to come by, even in a monastery deep in the European woods. And peace now in our world, to some, seems hard to come by. Consider the senseless violence we endured in the year 2017. Through November, over 14,000 people had died from guns, and 42 of those deaths involved law enforcement officers. On October 1st, a deranged individual shot 59 and injured 500 at a concert, shooting from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. The largest human carnage on United States soil ever. And unfortunately, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, 27 members of the First Baptist Church in Sutherland, Texas, perished at the hands of another disturbed shooter. So why was 2017 filled with so much violence and so many unnecessary deaths? And what should our Christian response be to this needless and senseless bloodshed? How can we hope to find any real peace in our world when daily we read in the newspaper or on the internet of car bombings or other human destructive behavior? How can we hope to find that stillness of heart, that tranquility of soul, which leads to harmony in relationships? Our New Testament reading from the book of Hebrews implores us to pursue peace with everyone and the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. In this verse, the author of the letter to the Hebrews appears to be alluding to what John read from Psalm 34, verse 14, where it was written, "Depart from evil and do good, seek peace, and pursue it." So what do we as Christians here in Topeka, Kansas do to promote and pursue peace in our community? And what type of peace should we pursue? I started my research on this topic by asking my 5.5-year-old granddaughter on Christmas day after she opened her presents. I said, "Sophie, what is peace?" And she looked at me with a smile and said, "Granddad, you know, quiet. Peace and quiet, like my mommy always talks about." And you know, she's right. I bet every person in the sanctuary longs for peace and quiet in their lives. Peace and quiet in their families. Peace and quiet in their children's schools, in their children's parks and recreation areas, and in our churches. In 1963, Martin Luther King delivered his famous speech, "I have a dream from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And he said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by their color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Well, I have a dream too. And that dream is that my grandchildren and the other children of the world will not be victims of senseless acts of violence while playing in a park in their neighborhood. And I have a dream that my grandchildren and the other children of the world will not be the target of a bullet while sitting attentively in their classroom listening to their teacher. And I have a dream that my grandchildren and the children of the world will not have their long life ended while quietly listening to a preacher talk to them about the importance of peace and our God, the Prince of Peace, in church. So, I believe the response of Christians to the violence we see around us is frequent prayer, an ongoing dialogue with God. Pray for peace today, pray for peace tomorrow, and pray for peace every day in the future. Making praying for peace a part of your daily routine is essential for receiving everlasting peace. And why is that so? Because God will listen. Inspiration for this ongoing dialogue for peace can be found in the simple words of a young voice singing the Christmas song, "Let there be peace. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as our Father, brothers, all are we. Let me walk with my brother in perfect harmony." Yes, there is anguish and trepidation and fear in us when we daily read about all of this senseless violence. But while you're reading this, don't forget what the Apostle Paul said in Romans 8:18. "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed to us." And don't forget, the Apostle Paul suffered through multiple beatings, stonings, unjust imprisonments, hunger, thirst, and homelessness. Far more pain and anguish than any of us have ever endured. And I certainly don't want to minimize anyone's anguish associated with grieving over the violence we spoke about earlier. But it might help if we take a long-term perspective of the situation. Let's say the first week of 2017 you had a root canal. And 2 days after the procedure, you ran out of your pain medication. A week later, you crashed your car, and when you turned in the claim, your insurance adjuster told you you forgot to pay your premium. Bad way to start the year. But then every other day in 2017 was great. Your relationship with God was warm and intimate. You won the state lottery. And your wife had a healthy baby. The next New Year's Day, someone asked you, "How was 2017?" And your response would probably be, "Great." The 51 good weeks in the year outweighed that first bad week. And maybe that's a good analogy for heaven. That is not to deny there will be intermittent anguish and fear in your lives from the random act of violence we continue to hear about, but through an ongoing dialogue with God, through our prayers with God, we will persevere and get through these difficult times. It's like the story of a British church leader, Galvin Reed, who tells about meeting a young man who had fallen down a flight of stairs as a baby shattered his back. He had been in and out of hospitals his whole life, yet he made the astounding comment to Reed one day that he thought God had been fair to him. Reed asked him, "How old are you, boy?" And he said, 17. "How many years have you spent in hospitals?" And the boy responded, 13 years. The pastor said with astonishment, "And you think that's fair?" And the boy replied, "Well, God has all eternity to make it up to me." And He will. God promises a time when there will be no more crying, no more tears, no more pain and suffering, when we will be reunited with God in perfect harmony forever. And we decide whether to turn bitter or to turn to God for peace and courage when we hear about all this violence. When violence, like the recent carnage in Las Vegas, occurs, we should not turn bitter toward God or question whether He is the Prince of Peace. We should not run away from Him. We should run to Him in prayer. In John 16, verse 33, Jesus says, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. You will have suffering in the world, but be courageous. I have conquered the world." I believe Jesus Christ offers us in these two verses two things when we are hurting. First, peace to deal with our present, and second, peace to deal with the future. Through His own suffering and death, Jesus has deprived this world of its ultimate power over you. Anguish and suffering don't have the last word anymore. God has the last word. God offers these two very important things we need when hurting: peace to deal with the present, and like I said, peace to deal with the future. So the question becomes how? He's done that because He's conquered the world. Jesus came to earth in a peaceful way as a baby in a humble circumstance of a manger, and proceeded to live a humble and peaceful life. Jesus taught everyone who would listen to Him while He was on earth to love each other as they love themselves. Not a self-serving kind of love, but a self-respect kind of love. Jesus taught people to love their enemies as themselves. Imagine if every person, every group, every culture in this world learned to love each other and their enemies, there would be world peace. There would be peace on our streets. There would be peace in our schools. The good news of Christ was set loose in the world many, many years ago as the baby Jesus lay peaceably in a manger in His swaddling clothes. But will the peace the baby Jesus brought be the gift that we open to all, or will it just be a vision of sugar plums? God isn't some distant, detached, disinterested deity. Jesus personally entered our world and experienced our pain and suffering. Jesus is there with us in the lowest places of our lives. Places when we are in need. Jesus was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He loved, but was rejected. God does much more than sympathize with you and your troubles, your concerns and fears with the violence we regularly see in our lives. And after all, any close friend can sit beside you and comfort you. But Jesus is much closer than your closest friend. If you put your trust in Him, if you maintain a dialogue with Him, that He is you. and therefore your sufferings, pain, and sorrows are His. So in 2018, when tragedy strikes, as it will, when suffering comes, as it will, when you're wrestling with pain and anguish, as you will, and when you make the choice to run into His arms and pray, here's what you're going to discover. You'll find peace to deal with the present. You'll find courage to deal with the future. And you'll find the incredible promise of eternal life in heaven. I pray our lives are not a charade, but celebrate the joyful victory won for us by the Christ, the King, the Prince of Peace, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Let us go from church today with love written all over our face and make our New Year's resolution to pray for peace today and tomorrow. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Amen.